Okay, so that should now be coming through. Cool. Right, everyone. Hi, my name is Martin. I am a sort of full stack engineer or just full stack developer, but mostly I focus on the front end. And I try and specialize in React. It's sort of, I love working with React. I spend a lot of time doing stuff in it. And I think it's just really cool. And it's not just React, there's new things coming out all the time. Like there's Remix Run at the moment, which is another sort of framework built on React. So we're going to be looking at some basics of React, why we actually use React. Even though we learn React later on in the course, but what I'm going to be talking about now, you should be able to sort of understand a lot of the concepts. Like some of it, you might be like, okay, I don't actually know what's actually going on there. But I still recommend sort of hanging around to get like a bit of exposure. I'm going to try and make it so that it's also for people that are just starting out. A lot of the stuff you'll sort of like, you'll be able to take in some of it. So yeah, please do hang around, even if the stuff is a little bit sort of like high level or stuff that's coming up. Like I will try and keep like a lot of it simplified. Okay, so React is a framework, which it's actually not really a framework. It's more like a library. And when we say library, it means it's like a bunch of code they've put together, and we get to sort of add this to our project, and then we can start making use of this library to do all of these things that they've made available, like a whole bunch of features that they've made here. So like one of the limitations of HTML, sorry, let me just actually, I think I shared the wrong thing. Just hold on. Sorry about that. Just bear with me. Okay. So one of the limitations of HTML is that when we create HTML, and if you don't know what HTML is, it's basically how we sort of create the structure of a website. You can all see my screen, right? Just someone just do a hands up. Yeah, I'm going to get so. Okay, so one of the limitations of HTML is that when we write our HTML files, I'm just going to use an image here to populate the page. If we were to go and create something like a header here in our HTML, and by the way, this is the structure that's going to be sort of appearing here. It's the structure of how we generally build our websites. Like if you would see it as sort of an analogy for like a human body, this is generally like the skeleton. So if we were to go and actually create a header here, and we wanted to go and add content, so it's a typo there, and we would go and say this is a header. Let's just save it. Okay, I'll just zoom in here. So I've created a header. Now imagine we actually went and had a whole bunch of code inside here. So this is actually just get that to save. Sorry, I don't know why it's not auto formatting. Okay, so we had a whole bunch of code that was actually written here. Now, if we wanted to have 20 different other pages, so we wanted to have like a store page, and we wanted to have a contact page and a bar page and all those different things, we would have to go and duplicate this code across all of our files. So if we had this file here and that file and that file and that file and that file, so these are just all these copies that we would have. And if we wanted to go and change this, and we decided that we don't want it to be code, we wanted it to be code, and save it, we now have to go and duplicate this across all of our files here. Now, imagine you've got millions of files. You know, that's going to be problematic. Like, I don't think websites you usually got a million different files, but this is not scalable. This is a lot of problems, and it's actually a huge sort of limitation when it comes to HTML. Okay, so what React looks at doing is, where is my thing? Sorry, I've got like a picture here. Okay, here we go. Okay, so what React actually looks at doing is taking HTML and basically making it as components that we can then just create in one place. So for example, just imagine like this post, I think it's called a post. This post we created in just one place, and then we actually get to reuse this throughout our website. So imagine it gets used on, like, I don't know how many people use Facebook. Let's just take a wild guess at like 50 million. I have no idea how many people use Facebook. We only write this component in our HTML once. We just have to write it once. And then if we want to use it anywhere else, we just call it. So we would just say like, let's have an example here. So I'll do it like this. Just give me a second. So my VM's just misbehaving. Just hold on. Go. Okay, so imagine this was like our component. We had a separate file here. Let's actually make a separate file and we call it our component.html. And inside here, we can have this component here. So let's just say we just had like a box. And then inside our box, we maybe had a title and we would say like, what is this? Just Tom Russell, and that's our title. So then we could actually go and use this HTML file through all of our code. So it's going to delete these other ones. We don't need this nonsense anymore. Okay. And it's going to split this other one down so that it's at the bottom. Okay. So now we've got that at the bottom there. And we could actually just go like this and say component. And that's it. Actually, we want a self-closing tag, so we want it like that. And now this is actually going to go and use this code here whenever we actually want to use it. So if we're going to go and want to change any of the content, we just need to go and change it in here. And we change it once and it reflects throughout our whole code base. And that's a very common pattern in programming, stuff that we strive for the longest time with programming. One of the things that haven't changed, many things have changed, but one of the things that haven't changed is redundancy. We don't want to be repeating things over and over because it makes it harder to change things. We want to create something once, and then we want to make instances of it, or basically take copies of it, so that they all reference this one place. They're all linked to this one place, and then we only change this one thing over here, and then it reflects throughout our code base. Now, where the next sort of thing comes in with React, and we'll go into this in detail in a moment, is that this is currently hard-coded to be Tom Rousseau. What we'd actually want here is something like this. We actually want something like a name value. Now, I'm just putting braces around here so that this when the browser reads this, or whatever reads this, the compiler or the computer reads this, it knows that I'm not just saying name. Otherwise, it's going to want to put name there. So we'd put something like this to say, hey, okay, look, this is actually going to be code that's going to run here. And then what we could actually do in our component, we could actually say name and then Tom Russell. So now this is actually going to, for this component, this name here is going to go shoot all the way into here, and it's going to get replaced. It's going to display here. So it actually becomes like a reusable component. So I could actually go now and I could just say, Ola Nordman. Okay. So now the other, I would have two components. I'd have one like this, and I'd have one just below it, and that one would say Ola Nordman. Okay. So that's really just the basics of how React works. When you dumb it down, it actually gets down to this. This isn't actually React yet. We're going to go and do React now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and open the terminal here, just zoom it in a tiny bit. And I'm going to go and create a React app. So when it comes to React, you can actually just import it as a library. Like you can actually just go and literally download it off the internet, and you just put it in any kind of project you're working in, and then you just load it in, and it will actually work. But that is not usually how we use React. When it comes to React, what we do is we create an entire app using React. We create like an entire app, and it's all built in React. So the way that typically happens is, sorry, let me just take a step back. So React on its own is just this sort of what I showed you here, where you've got this content. So let me minimize that, where you sort of got this content and it renders out these sort of components. But it's not a good developer experience. There's a lot of stuff that's missing, and it's not actually added to React. So what we do when we actually want to use React, we use like a big bundle. It's sort of like this sort of default package that we can make use of, and it's called Create React App. And it comes with like all of the stuff included straight out of the box. So we just run the command. It installs it on our computer into like a folder that we want, like our app folder. And then straight out the box, we can just start using it. We don't have to mess around with adding tooling and all kinds of things. When I say tooling, it means like, well, I'll have to get back to tooling in a moment so I can get sort of like a low-level example there. So let's actually look at just adding React, and then you'll see what I mean by the tooling. So I'm going to go npx create React app, and I haven't done this for a while, so hopefully this is not going to throw issues. And I'm just going to use React demo 1. And if hopefully this is not outdated or anything, like I know there have been updates in that very recently, so hopefully this is not going to have any issue, but it should literally just be this simple. I'm going to go and just kill this. Are there any questions in the meantime? Silly question. Is there not something we can download and install from the official website? You can probably from just GitHub, not really from the official website, because the way that these sites work, or like software works these days, is that it's, unless it's something that's running natively on your desktop, and natively means like inside Windows or inside Mac OS or inside Ubuntu, like when you click start and it's actual native application. Unless there's an application like that, you're not going to find it there. You're going to be finding it on GitHub, so that they can always have the latest version available for you. Whereas if they push the code for GitHub to GitHub and the code's there and updated, it's not necessarily updated on their website. And not just that, generally, because it's packages, we generally pull our packages from GitHub. Okay, so you don't just get something from the website, but with that command that I showed you, it really is just that simple to actually kick off like a brand new app. So let me just close this. So this is actually finished running. So let's just go into this project. We can call it React Demo 1. Okay, and I'm just going to open the code editor. So I did code dot. When we type code, it's going to open VS Code, but it's just going to open up an empty instance of VS Code. But what we actually want to have is, I'm going to zoom this in for now. Sorry, this thing's kind of irritating. I do my coding in a VM so that everything's isolated. I don't have to worry about viruses or anything, and it's easy for me to back up my system. And not just that, developing purely on Windows is problematic when it comes to JavaScript web development, because of all of the packages are basically built to run on Linux or Linux. Okay, so what I've done here is I've said code dot to open up VS Code, and it's opening up the entire folder, because we only ever want to be opening up folders in VS Code. You don't want to be opening up individual files. You always want to be opening up individual folders. And what VS Code will do is that it'll actually remember your session. So what that means is that if I had this window, I dragged this up to get my terminal. And if I had, let's get a file open here. If I had this app.js open, and then let's split this to the right so that we've got another window. And then on this one, I open index.js. Okay, so you see I've got index.js here and app.js. So let's just go, oops, it's, wife wants me to come and spend some time with her. I need to get off the computer. So I have to close that, done. I'll come back the next day and I'll code dot. And what's going to happen is it's going to remember everything the way that it all was. Okay, so you can see now I've got index still over here, got app.js over here. It might even give a message. There we go. Session contents restored from when I was working on it. Okay, so that's why we always actually want to be opening folders. Like, so you don't actually ever want to be opening up individual files. I must apologize. I've got a bug on this installation where I can't just manually resize things. I have to do it with the city button. So I do apologize for that. For some reason, it's always VS Code that's got that issue. Okay, so this is now the basics of React. Let's actually first get it running. Now, for those of you that haven't started the React yet, this is a lot of noise. Okay, like I understand it. You look at that and it's going to be confusing. It's going to be intimidating, and it's just it makes you want to sweat. Don't stress about it. Like in later on the course, this will all actually make sense, and it'll all actually be very simple. But now, while it's still you haven't been exposed to it yet, it's going to sort of not make much sense at all. So just a quick basics of what actually is going here is, for our whole project, we've got one main file that tells us exactly what this project is going to do and all the things that are installed with it. It's like an installation file, and we would run a command and then it uses that installation file to install our entire app. And that is this package.json. So this is the one that's sort of the most important. Like if you delete this, then you have some problems. You're going to have to bring your code back from Git. So in here, you can actually see that in this package.json, there's all these dependencies. And these are things that are built that make up our project. So you can see there's React here. It uses this dependency. It's a library. If I went to GitHub, if I went to like React GitHub, it's going to be all of this code here. That's basically in this package. So all of this code here is this package here. Then there's another one, React DOM. And if I was to pull that up on a website, it's going to have its own GitHub repository and React scripts and web vitals. You don't even actually need this one yet, but it just comes built in with that Create React app. So you can see that when we're actually using Create React app, we've actually got some extra things added here. So we've this testing library. This allows us to write tests for our code, and tests are basically we write a program, a little script basically, and it goes and tests. Like we would say, does our code say save to reload? And then it runs a test and it checks our code and it sees, okay, it does say safe to reload. And if it doesn't, then it fails. It gives it a big X and says, no, this code doesn't pass our test. So you've got all this kind of tooling that's actually added to it. But yeah, so right now we're not really too worried about this. This is just sort of dependencies, so you do know what happens. Sorry, before I move on, these dependencies, they get installed to this node modules folder. So I'm going to open this, and there's going to be a scary amount of stuff in here. I'll be honest with you, I don't even know what like 99% of what it does, the stuff that's in here. Like you look at this is just, it's a scary amount of stuff that's in here. I mean, that's just A's and that's B's and there's C's, and that's just a lot of stuff. We don't care about this. Honestly, we don't care about this. The way that the JavaScript web development environment works, and not just JavaScript, Python, some other places or some other things, is that there's all these little packages like React that we go and we use in our project. And then maybe we have one that calculates the time for us, like it converts time. So it converts from South African to Norwegian time, or currency converter. You know, you could, if you had your own business or, you know, worked for a place, you could have them. They could have you rebuild these things, like build React from scratch or build like a currency converter from scratch. But why reinvent the wheel? You know, the people that create that, they're going to maintain it and they're going to make sure that all the bugs are gone. They're going to make sure they handle all the edge cases. And edge cases are where like really, really unique cases where it's like you would never really ever do it. But someone somewhere in the world has managed to do this one type of edge case, like this really rare input that they've put in. And these people that are maintaining that library, they would have caught that. Whereas if we did it, we wouldn't have all of these users testing it and finding all these bugs for us. So it's better that we let other people do this. Let's don't reinvent the wheel. We just use their code. It's open source, so we are allowed to use it. It's better that we just actually use it, and then we can build out the things that we need to do. But then with that being said, you don't want to just import a million different things. Sometimes if it is basic, you kind of just actually rather code it out yourself instead of just always throwing, like, don't just always try and get a library. If there's something that needs to console log something, you don't need, or something that needs to output to like the terminal here, you don't need to actually go and get a library for that. You know, sometimes you just actually want to do it yourself. Let's move this up. Okay, so no questions. Okay, so that's the dependencies. Now let's actually look at how we start this. In our package.json file, there's also these scripts that we run. And basically, these are little commands we can run, and then it's actually going to do something with our app. We can create these ourselves. Doesn't even need to be called this. I can call it start 1, 2, 3. And by me running the script here, it's going to start my React app. And if you're not at this part of your course yet, you don't need to remember this stuff, but at least now you've got a little bit of exposure. Like I bet one thing from this session, you're going to be like, oh, I remember him talking about that. So let's actually start our app. You know, we haven't actually done that, talking a lot of nonsense here. Let's start it off. Okay, so I'm going to go npm start. And sorry, I should say npm run start. So I'm saying for this package manager, which is that thing that does all the dependencies for us, like don't worry about that yet. We're saying run, and then any one of these. So I could say run start, run build, run test, run eject. So I'm going to say run start, and it's going to go and start up our app now. And I'm just holding my fingers here that there's going to be no issues here, because it's been a while since I've actually ran Cracked app on this specific instance. Okay, so there we go. We've actually got React running there. That's how your Cracked app comes. It's got the spinning little icon for React. This is actually the logo for React, and that's it. That's how we actually get our React app running. Now we're going to now actually sort of break down how React works. That was just sort of an intro. Just want to check how long the session is, because I could talk about this stuff forever. It's 1 hour. Are there any questions yet before I dive into the next parts of actual React? That was sort of just the intro to it. Okay, nothing. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and take all of this out, and then we're actually going to go and work through the different parts of React. So I'm going to take out the class. This is all just stuff we don't need to have. And I'm just going to say hello world and just zoom in so that we can see what we're talking about here. Okay, so this is now a basic React app. Remember when we looked at the HTML and I showed you that we had sort of that little component and we would reuse it. This is now a component here. Actually, let's actually recreate what I was actually talking about earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file. I'm going to call it component. Doesn't have to be called component. We just calling it component. I'll call it component X. And then I say .js. In the past, we used to use JSX extension. So .jsx, and you can see now the icon becomes a JavaScript icon instead of a Java icon. And that was needed for like our tooling when it came to converting files so that it would know what file it is. But it's also, even though we don't need to do this anymore, now the tooling and all of that handles it, it's still become sort of common practice to name your files like this with a JSX so that a person immediately knows, am I looking at a normal JavaScript file? Am I looking at a TypeScript file? Am I looking at a JavaScript component, a TypeScript component? So it's better to actually use .jsx, but you don't have to. But yeah, personally, I prefer it because then I get the little cool React icon over there. So we're creating a component X here. Now, let's think about what should we actually have in this component? Let's just maybe make it like let's do the thing with the name, okay? So I'm going to create a function here, and I'm going to call it component X, and I'm going to return a div, and I'm going to say, hello, Ola Norton. Okay. Now, I'm just going to talk about sort of a little bit complex stuff, but it won't be for long, so don't zone out here. React is based on functions that are returning components. That is why when it comes to React, we have to only return one value here. If you've covered JavaScript in that, you'll know that if we have a function like my function and we're returning something, so say I had like a sum, so const sum is equal to 10 plus 20, then we return. We can't return, let's make we had two sums here. We had sum 1 and sum 2. We can't return sum 1 and sum 2. We can't do that in a function. A function needs to return only one value. We should only ever have one return. So React is actually it's also just functions. Like, don't overthink it. It's just a function. And like a function is over here, we can only return one value. So you can't actually go and return this code. Let me do that. We can't actually do this in React, where we're actually returning this and this. This is basically two values alongside each other. We can't actually do that in React. So just had to cover that. Okay, so we've now got this component here, and you can see it's like HTML. We will dive into this in a moment. It's just like HTML where we've got a div. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to split this down so that it's actually at the bottom, and we're going to have app at the top here. So we can work with this at the top and we can work with this at the bottom. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to import this into this component so we can actually use it. So I'm going to say import component X from component X. And now I'm going to go and just break a new line here. I'm now going to use this component. Now, the way that this component works, I haven't actually gone and exported this. So hold on, sorry. Okay, so we've got this exported. So for us to use this, we use it just like an HTML tag. So we use it just like this. So it's basically, this has now become like an HTML tag. It's going to sort of run this function and it's going to output this. So let's actually go and do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add, I'm actually going to take this out. Actually, just going to take that out. I'm going to add component X and save it. Okay. So now our code is basically, this component is now running in our code. You can see it. Hello, Ola Nordman. There it is. Hello, Ola Nordman. And I could make 5 of these, and save it. And see now it's actually doing it 5 times. And I could, now, if we remember that first example, we had all of those files on the left. We had to keep we had I don't know, 8 different copies there. We just have one copy here. And if I was to now, like say my project manager comes along and she says, no, we need exclamations to make it seem like we're really happy to see them. Then we make one change here and it's reflected in each one of these because this is actually referencing this component. Okay, so it's all linking to this one. Like if you could imagine sort of, it's like they're all just drawing lines to this one component that we've done here. Yeah, and these are basically called components where we create sort of like this reusable piece of code. Like this is where React is largely based upon is creating these components. So let's just actually go back to that Figma document that I had here. So like we created this component, I think I've actually got a better one to explain here. No, I would just stick with this one. So like we had that hello component, we'll have like a component like this. We would write all this code inside here in our React component, and then we just reuse it wherever we want in the website, and it becomes very, very easy to maintain code like that. Okay, so this is a basic component, but as you can see, it becomes difficult because we can't have every single user in the world as Ola Nordman. That's a problem. What if our user doesn't have that name? So we'd have to ensure that we only allow people with this name to sign up to our service with the way that it's written. So this isn't good. So what we can do then is use props, and that stands for properties. And what properties are values we can pass from when we call this component. When I say call it, I mean we just write it here. So when we write this component, we can give values into this, and then they're going to be available over here. So let's say for this first one, I actually want to have a first name. Actually, I just want to have a name. I just want to have a name, and this name is going to be Ola Nordman. Okay. Then for the next one, I'm going to have, I can't remember the female version. Let's call it Katie Nordman. And she can have a daughter, Lily. And then they've got a son, Oliver. Okay, so big family here. Now, these name values are actually going to be available as props or properties in this component. We are sending this data into this component, but you can't see it yet because it's sort of like a magical hidden away thing. And it's a thing that we write here, props. Okay, so that's what we write there. Now, if I console log this, and if you're new to all of this, and it's fine if you're not getting what I'm talking about now, it's not a problem. If we console log this, and by the way, console logging is where we send stuff to a console like this. So in our browser, if we inspect, we can send messages to our console in our browser. And basically that is for like, if we want to, like when we developer, this is like our secret messages that only we want to know about and want to sort of see. We would go and send the stuff so that we can see, okay, like this is the information that's actually happening. And it lets us, it's like behind the scenes. Like if you're building electrician and you're building this giant sort of terminal with all the wiring, you can go into the back and you can look at all the different wiring. So that's sort of what's happening here. We're sending these sort of messages for us to debug our app. So when I'm actually logging props, it's going to log for each one of these. It's first going to log this first one. And you can see now when I log props, I actually got a name, Ola Nordman. Then the next one, it's going to run now. So this component's running, and this is the next one that's console logging. And there you can see we've got Katie. Then the next one logs, and there we've got Lily. And then the next one logs, we've got Oliver. Okay, so these values are now being passed into this component, but it's different for each one. So what we can do now is we can go and say, hello. Actually, let's do this. So I want this props, we can see we've got this name attached to it. Now, if you still haven't got to JavaScript yet, you're not going to understand this completely, but basically we've got objects and those use key value pairs. So let's have a very, very quick look at how an object usually works. So we have something like a person, looks like this. This is an object, and you'll see there's curly braces. And then inside here, we can have it's called key value pairs. And it's basically just, there's a label. So let's say there's like a first name. And then we say Ola, and then like a last name. So we've created this, it's called an object because it's meant to sort of like represent how things are in the real world. So then we've got this real person object. And what does a person usually have? They usually got a first name as like a label, and then they got like a last name as a label. And then the first name, this is the value, and the last name, this is the value. But now how do we get these values out of here? So it's actually quite simple. We would just go and say, so console log, so we can see what it's going to say. And we just got to say person, and then we put a dot. And then here are the values that we just created. So by putting person dot, it's going to show us these values here. And then we can actually just get those values. So I'm going to say person dot first name, and I'm going to save it. Because of this, there's going to be a lot of noise. Let me just take that out, and I'll just clear that. and reload the page. Okay, so you can see that we've got Ola when I'm trying to log this first person name. Okay, so let's just so this is an object, just a quick over view of what an object is. For those that are at React, you probably already know what an object is, but sometimes people get confused. So better I'll just quickly go over it. Just having a look at these questions. I'm going to jump on it in a second. Sorry. Okay, so let's delete that. Okay, so the reason why I was showing you the object is because props is an object. This name is actually part of props. So that's actually props.name is going to get us this name from the component. So let's actually try that. Let's go say console log props.name. And now, as a prediction, we're going to get Ola Nordman, Katie Nordman, Lily, and Oliver when we save. So let's save it, and there we go. So we're getting these values now. So the way I've got this set is it's not actually, it's preserving. Why is it preserving the log? Thought it's going to hot reload. Guess not. So you can see that we're logging out each of these names that we're passing in. So that's actually huge. Like this is my favorite part of React. This is called props, and it's one of the two biggest parts of React. And that allows us to make our components dynamic. So what we can actually do here is remember when we did that other example earlier, you open the curly braces, and then I'm going to write here props.name. If I didn't have these curly braces, it's not going to know that this is actually meant to be code. This is just a string now. It's just like I wrote it down. It's not like magical or anything, or like it's code. It's just text. So if I save this, you're just going to see hello props name. We don't want that. So we go and we put the curly braces, and then immediately you can see the color is actually changing. Without that, it's white, like a strange gray. But then if we add this, now it's got this blue, which indicates it's code. It's not text anymore. So let's save it. And there we go. I'm actually going to just get rid of this. The PM said that she doesn't want that anymore. So let's just get rid of that. Okay, so now we've got hello Ola Nordman, hello Katie, hello Lily, hello Oliver. And that's basically props. So, and we can just write as many as we want here. If I just want to go and let's just say no, that's not a good example there. Just position. Yeah, let's just do that and just say like dad, and then mom, and then sibling. I'm just going to copy this to you. Okay, and then we go and console log this props. Oh, where did I go wrong here? Oh, okay. So when we console log these props, let's just refresh the page. So now each component is going to be getting whatever's here. So this first component, when it's getting called and it comes in here, it's first going to get name, Ola Nordman, and then position dad. Then the next one is going to get Katie Nordman, position mom, and so on and so on. Okay, so I'm going to have to move on for this. So I'm taking a little bit too long to explain these concepts. So before I jump into the next one, which is state, there's something I need to mention about React. In that React is, what makes React special is that it's a single page application, or otherwise an SPA. So let's actually just get rid of this for now. So what that means is it only loads one HTML file. When we were looking at that example I gave you right at the beginning, where I had all of those copies, all those different examples, those were all different HTML files. React isn't actually like that. If I open public here, and this is usually what, this is usually the stuff that you can kind of copy over. You'll see there's actually only one index.html file. So I'm going to open it, and then we're going to scroll down to this element here. And basically what React is doing is it's using JavaScript to take all of that stuff we created, for example, this, and it adds it into this container here. Then if there's ever a change, it deletes whatever's in here. So say it made a whole bunch of stuff, but then a change happens. What it does is it deletes all the stuff, and then it writes in more stuff again. And then it does it again, and it writes it again. But this is happening in like 0.006 milliseconds. Okay, maybe not that fast, but like 0.60 milliseconds is often how quick a render can take. It happens incredibly fast. So that's what makes React special, is that it's actually not individual files that are actually getting loaded. it's actually only one file that gets loaded. And then it's using JavaScript. It's using a whole bunch of code to automatically go and change the content of the page. So for example, when I go and I actually change this Ola, and I'm just going to write Ola, and then I save it, and then it's populated there. It didn't reload this page. It's blitz fast. You can actually see, let me undo that, save it, and it's bam, it's just like that. Because that's what makes sort of React so magical, is it's using JavaScript to very quickly go and change whatever's on the page. And that leads to very, very fast page loads. Like it's almost seamless to the person, experiencing it. Whereas usually when you load a page, it's got to load in, and then you click something, then the whole page has to load, and then it sort of comes down, and then it fills up with data. React is using JavaScript to just quickly populate it. Okay, so then also before I go on to state, one more other thing. This HTML that's written here, that we've been using, we've just been writing it like normal HTML. For those of you that don't know HTML, this is looks just like our normal HTML when you write it. So if I had a UL, which means unordered list, and then I have like a list item, so list item 1. Okay, and let's just save those. So now, so this is just like stuff like in a word processor, like Microsoft Word or in Google Docs. This is the same HTML that we would normally write, if you've been doing HTML, but except it's not. In React, even though we're actually writing HTML here, it's actually not HTML. It is actually JSX, which stands for JavaScript XML. And it's a way for us to write elements like we know HTML. But what actually happens in the background is it actually does this. When React runs through this, and let's say there is a div, what it does there is it actually runs this command. It runs React create element. And then inside here, it runs the element we want to create. Then there's sort of the props. And then lastly, any children that are actually coming in. We don't actually have any children. So I just think we should just say null. The children would be all of this stuff that's inside of this component. And that's part of the DOM. Eventually, when we do learn about DOM, the document object model, let's not go down that route. But so when you're actually running a div here, it's getting turned into this code here. And then that actually runs. You could actually go and write your code without JSX. You don't actually have to use this. You could take this out and you could write it like this. You could write this create div, this create element div. Then you would do create element UL, and you would save that as a variable. Then you would add that variable here where it's a child. It's because this is actually a child. It belongs to this div. Like if I was to nest this away, can you see that it's actually part of it? So we would add that as a child, and then we would add these list items of the UL that we created. So just so that you don't need to be writing code as this, but I'd rather you sort of know what really is happening behind the scenes. And this JSX is actually turning into this create element code. Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes left, but I don't mind going after this if any of you do actually want to stay around, and we can still talk about some other concepts. Actually, wait. So I actually think I need to do these questions very quickly. Okay, another new question. Other than naming the JS files, is it advisable to name the CSS? No. Okay, so no, we still use CSS and HTML. It's just JS and JSX. Yeah, because that's actually been answered. So, okay, so Christopher's asked, is it not possible in vanilla JavaScript that we have the contact page load in the index.html? No, that is the limitation that I was talking about earlier. I mean, you could technically load it in as a frame, but that's not how we want to do it. Unfortunately, no, that's not how it works. When it comes to you using the internet, you would type in an address here. So say www.myawesomewebsite.com. I typed that in the browser. So then let's see if no, it's not going to work. I was just going to try and draw some stuff there. So what happens when I type this in the browser, myawesomewebsite.com, and I push enter, my browser is going to send a GET request to the server. So it's saying, hey, I want something from you. I want this website. Then the website goes and says, okay, I've got your request. Now I'm going to send all the stuff back. So if we had a normal HTML page, it's going to go and then send all of the stuff back to the browser. And then our browser, when it loads this file, it looks at this first line. It sees, oh, it's doc type HTML. So it learns, okay, this is an HTML file. And then it passes through this, or it loads it as HTML. So then if I was to click contact, it sends the same GET request, but to the contact endpoint. And then it sends back that page. Whereas React, we only send this one request for this first page. The browser's only going to send this one request, and then it's going to get this one page back. And then it's going to be using JavaScript to load inside of this div. That's not to say that you can't do more API requests inside of React. You can still go and fetch data from like a database and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to, if we had another page here, it doesn't have to go to some kind of endpoint and get that page and load it back. We just have to load this very first page. And that's always how React works. It's always going to work this way. You do get things like Gatsby, where it's called a static site generator. And what it does is it turns all of our pages that we did have as JavaScript. It's kind of like we reverse what we do. So if we had a contact page, it goes and takes all that JavaScript and it actually ends up creating its own contact.html page. But it's insanely fast. Gatsby is crazy fast. It will actually go, if you had a link here where you go and you hover over like that contact page, it will actually preload that page. So that by the time you actually click it, it's already loaded by your browser. But yeah, that's a story discussion for another day. So we need to just quickly jump onto state so that we can sort of at least cover the main basis of why we're using React and all of that. Okay, so we've got our app here. Let's actually just get rid of some of the stuff. I'm actually going to get rid of all of that. And so we just got our basic page again. Let's just write basic here. Made a mistake there, deleted that. Okay, so this is all cool. We've got like our props that we can pass through and everything. And that's great. You've got like a static website, but that's not why React was built. React was built by Facebook because they needed a way for the user interface to react to people doing things. Currently, if you're just using HTML and CSS, sorry, HTML and JS, let's go back to this design here. When you're trying to track state, in other words, where's an example here of something that is state? Oh, there's nothing here for me to actually represent state here. Okay, unfortunately, this is not a good example for state. But basically, state is that imagine there was a button and you click the button, and then it turns an apple into a banana for some reason on your screen. It turns an apple into a banana if you click the button. Now, for HTML and CSS and JavaScript, sorry, HTML and JavaScript, for us to track that type of thing becomes very difficult. For us to know, is the button clicked? Has the image changed? And all of the stuff. And you have to like keep track of like all of these states. And then you have to update all of your DOM. When I say DOM, like these nodes, yeah, you would have just a whole bunch of these if you're doing it manually. And then you'd have to go and update all of these. And it becomes a nightmare of trying to keep track of all the state. So what React originally set out to do is to go and manage state. It manages state very, very well, actually, arguably, but it's there to basically have props that we pass into components as well as state. And basically, when we had this component here, these props here, I can't go and change this value. Props are only one directional. So if I was to pass this props name in here, this Ola name, I can't change this from inside here. I'm not allowed to change it. What we instead have to do is make use of a state. And bear with me, when you first look at this, it's sort of going to be like, I don't really understand what's going on, but with some time you will get it, and you'll see that it's actually not like, don't overthink it. It's not some kind of hugely complex thing. So let's just quickly have a look at how we actually manage state. This is one of the new React versions. So I don't know if I could just write use state. So let's put it up there. Okay, so we're going to create a state here, and basically state is a variable that we can update all the time. With React, we can't just have a normal variable like this, like let my variable equal 10, and then go and just keep changing this variable. It doesn't work like that. What React does is it works on the state, and then whenever our state is updated, or this variable that we're going to be creating called state, whenever that's updated, it recreates this part of the app. It redoes it, and then it updates the new value. So let's have a quick look at some state here. So I'm going to go and just create a state called number, and then a function to set number. So this first one is our actual variable that we can use somewhere. So I'm just going to say like number, and then we can actually go and use it here. Okay, so we can go and use number. This is where it's being used. But now we also need a way to change number. We can't just go and say like number is equal to 10. It doesn't work like that with state and React. We need a function to go and change number. And that's what this second function is here. Okay, so we always go and we create this is called destructuring an array, but don't worry about that. We just go and have these square braces, and we'll have the number, the actual variable, the state variable, and then the function to set the state variable. And then we go and we say equals to useState. And then when we go and create this useState, so I'm just going to say react.useState. You don't have to do it like this. You can also go and import useState here. So you can just comma and useState. Just do it like this. It looks a little bit cleaner. So in here, we can have basically the default value. So this is now, when I create the state, it's going to be whatever's written here. So if I have 0, state is going to, sorry, number is going to be 0. So let's just actually save, and then you can see number is 0. If I wanted to start with 999 and I save it, there you can see that it's 999. Okay, so we've got this number in here. Now, what I just want to do is actually want to create another div. So let's just do this. I don't know why that's not working. There we go. Okay, save that. And now we're just going to have a button here. And we're going to have an on click. We expand this in a moment. Just hold on. Okay, so there's nothing in our buttons, so just right click. Okay, so I've created a button here. I'm actually going to take this code out. So we can just we'll get to that in a second. So we've got this number here, and then I've got this button where I've actually created this just a button that just says click. Now in JavaScript, or just normal HTML JavaScript, you can add event listeners to your buttons. And basically what that means is it's actions. So when you're on a page, like if a person clicks a button, how do you know when they've clicked it? So what you do is you create an event listener, and the person clicking the button is an event. And the reason why it's called a listener is because it's sitting there waiting for that person to click that button. But you don't just have button on click. You can have like keyboard event listeners. So like when you press a key down and when you lift a key, or if you're just pressing a key, there's just tons of event listeners. Then even like with mobile phones, you can touch those event listeners. So usually you got to bind an event listener to something. So you'd have to go and get this with like an RD. We say like RD is equal to just my button. Okay, so this would be an RD. Then what you would usually do is you would say something like document.get element by RD, and then my button. So this is how you would usually target it. And then you could add an event listener onto this. With React, we don't actually have to do that. We just simply have to go and say whatever action we want here, whatever event. So we're just going to say on click. And now instead of doing all of that, we could just actually just have our code here for our on click event listener. So I'm going to say on click. And over here, we're going to console log. We're going to have an anonymous function here. I won't be able to dive into that right now, but I'm just going to say click. Right, so save it. Let's just refresh. Okay, so when I'm clicking, it's now going and saying click, and I can just keep clicking it, and the number increases. When you see this in your console, when you're coding, and there's a number here, that means that this was output, and instead of going and flooding the screen, it's just giving you a number. There is something in the settings where, I think it's this one. Yeah. Okay, so you don't actually have to have it grouped like that. It's just, it makes it cleaner. So that setting is group similar messages in console. So there you can see. So it's counted that I did it 16 times. So now what we actually want to do here is we actually want to use set number to change this number. So instead of having a function here, I don't like it that you've got it like this, and this is actually quite bad, but for reasons I'm not going to go into now, we can instead just have a function that we call. So I'll create a function here that says, we'll call it on button click. Well, I don't have the function keyword. Oops. So we say function on button click, and then we are going to use that function over here. We just say on button click. We don't want to put parentheses because that will immediately call this function or immediately evoke it. So this would, if we save this now, this is just automatically going to run this function. Not when we're clicking it, it's immediately just going to run this straight away because we put the parentheses. We actually want to have the function like this, so that when we're clicking the button, then it's going to be calling the function. So here we can go and say console log click. Let's refresh this. Okay, so now I can go and click, and then you can see it's the exact same thing we had earlier, but it's a lot cleaner now. We've now got a function that gets called by the event listener, right? So now we want to go and now start really playing with state. So the way it works is we will go set number. So here's this function that we're calling. We've first got the state, and then we've got the function we use to set the state. And this can be anything. It can be whatever you so desire. It doesn't have to be like set number. It could be whatever it is. The main thing is, though, is that this is always on the left-hand side is always going to be the variable, and whatever's on the right-hand side is always going to be the function to set that variable. And the way that it's usually done, which is an old React thing, is we usually have the name of how we want to call it. So even if it's first name, then we have set whatever it is we're changing it. So you just add set onto this first one. Okay, so I'm going to say set number, and I'm just going to make it become 555. Save it. Okay, so now what's going to happen when I click this? Can you see it's gone and changed it? Now this is where React is huge. For us to have gone and changed this is huge if you're doing it manually. It might not seem like a lot now, but I promise you that is incredibly difficult to do, especially if this is now being replicated 50 times throughout your app. We have to select this DOM. We have to make sure that we're keeping track of this number. Then we have to update this DOM, this element here. And it is incredibly hard to do that, especially when you've now got something like this, where you've got all of these different cards that have come in, all of these different sort of these individual cards for these contacts, and then this card here. It's just so much stuff. Like it's become such a headache, and things just go wrong all the time when you try and manually set state. That is why we've had birth of these different frameworks, is that it's just so easy for us to go and do this. So what I'm going to actually do here is I'm going to instead go and get the previous number and just keep adding one. But now there's a slight trick here. We can't just go and say number plus one from this number here. And this is a bit more higher level, so it's fine if you don't get this. I'm just showing you anyways. It's fine if you don't get this. This will end up leading to a stale state. When React runs and it changes the state, so this, let's say there's the state that gets updated here, it re-renders this whole component. So in other words, it recreates this whole thing again. And then when we go and we change the state here, whenever this value here changes, this whole thing gets recreated again. So React is actually recreating your app all the time. Anytime there's a state update, it recreates the entire app. Well, not the entire app, but the entire component that is impacted by it. So I'm going to speak about that in like our last couple of minutes. Well, there's a lot of questions. Okay, look, the time's about to run out in 2 minutes. This is being recorded, so if you need to head off, you're more than welcome to. I'm going to keep going if that's fine with MJ, and I'll just take his silence as an acceptance if it's cool. So I'm just going to keep going. I'm sorry that I did run over. It's hard to try and get these things, and I could talk about this stuff forever. So you're more than welcome to leave, and you can just catch the recording at a later stage. It'll probably be like another 10, 15 minutes. I'll just keep going on just a couple more things that it is important for those that are busy working with React that I want you to know about React. Okay, so when we actually, and I will get your questions as soon as I'm done with this. Okay, so when we actually want to go and use this number, when we're actually setting the state, this can end up with a stale state, because what you can have is you can have this code re-renders, but then number is not up to date yet. And then it uses an older version of number, and then you end up with what's called a stale state. And that just creates so many headaches in React. In the beginning, you're going to start struggling with some like sort of state updates and all of that, especially because we're using functional components. You can see we're using a function here, but it's called a functional component. Dealing with state becomes a bit tricky when you're calling lots of states. As just an example, if we had, let's say we had three numbers, we had set number one, well, set number two, and stop that, and set number three. And then we were to go and do all three of these, right? Each time this is calling, so we would call this first one, it's going to re-render this part here. It's going to re-render this and try and update everything in here. Then we run the second one, it does the same thing. And then we run the third one, it does the same thing. So by doing this 3 times, it's actually going to re-render this content. So it adds this content to the page, then it checks what's different and deletes what's not there, adds the content, deletes what's different, adds the content. And that can end up, when you're calling multiple states like this can end up like just causing a lot of headaches. And at this stage, you should rather use a reducer. If you don't want to talk about, you're like, what is this guy talking about? Like, don't worry about it. It's just for those that are busy working on React. If you get to the stage where you've got so many states, just rather use a reducer, and that will make it so that your state is basically just called once. Okay, so let's just revert all of this. And yeah, so back to this. How do we actually do it if we actually want to do it that we are adding one each time? So what we do here is we have an anonymous function. And inside this is going to be the previous state. It'll be the most updated version of the state that's being added in here. So usually what people use, they call it as previous state. You can call it whatever you want. You call it whatever you want to call it. But what is typically used is typically called previous state. And so all you have to do here is say previous state plus 1. Okay, so now let's go and actually get this starting at 0. Save it, and you can see it's updated. And now when we're clicking it, you can see that as I'm clicking this, this is updating. So that's really cool. Like for you to do this in JavaScript, and I mean, if you really want to challenge yourself, go and try and write this in JavaScript and then compare what you're actually doing here. Then try and imagine doing this 5 times on a page and then trying to write the code for that. It becomes really difficult. So, so before I get to the questions, there's one more last thing I want to actually discuss here. And that is, how does React, like what is React actually really doing when it comes to updating all of this? Okay, so a very popular way of building dynamic content, and we actually do it in the course before you get to React. A very popular way of doing this is that you have one div like this, and you use that as your container. In React, we call it root. I can't remember what they call it in the other libraries, frameworks. But there's this one container that you use. And then if you had an array, for example, let's say we had an array. Let me do it over here. Okay, so we just have const my array. And then over here, we just got these values. Now, if we would have gone and created HTML for each of these, we had code and we created HTML for all of these, and then we added here. If we wanted to remove one, the first option people think about is that, okay, I'm going to go into the DOM, which is, I'll show you the DOM if you don't know what the DOM is. Let's just inspect. Okay, so the DOM is basically this representation of our HTML. You would use your code to go into the DOM here, and you would go and delete that out. Like that's what you're first going to think is that, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to delete that out. But then that just becomes sort of so problematic. So a better way to do it is basically you have a function that draws this HTML and it adds the each time, okay? And then if you need to remove something, you just redraw it, but you instead delete it out of your array. So say we wanted to delete this last element here, and we didn't want it to be drawn anymore. We would just delete it from our array and then run that function. We'd clear this and then run the function to redo the HTML. So there, it's almost like a trick. It's like cheating our way around it. We just simply clear this whole thing, and then we just redo the array. Then say we want to get rid of this one. We don't go into our DOM here and use our code to delete it. We simply just clear this whole DOM. So imagine just delete it like that. And then we redraw it with whatever's remaining here. So in this case, it would have been that part of the array. Okay, so that's generally how we would typically do stuff before we got to React. We'd use like a container and we just render our content into that container. Then just keep changing our base data. We don't do any sort of DOM selection or anything. We just change our base data and re-render our content out. And if you haven't got to that part of the course, like remember what I'm saying here, because that's going to help you greatly when it gets to that. So let's talk about now what React is actually doing. Okay, so when I am clicking this button, back in the day, what you would do with sort of the way that I'm showing you now, before you get to that way, what would actually happen is a DOM comparison would take place. So say this was empty and then I added something. What you would do is you would take this DOM like this, as it appears here, all of these nodes, and then you would compare it with another one, but the data added. And then you would see, okay, this has now been changed. And then it goes and puts that new HTML in there because it sensed that there's a change. But that is incredibly memory intensive. For it to go and delete all this HTML and re-add all of that HTML is quite a process. It's just unnecessary. So what React does is it actually uses something called a virtual DOM. And basically it takes this DOM like this. And if you don't know, the DOM is just like the way these things are all sort of like part of a tree. These elements here. It takes it and puts it in memory instead. And it's called like the virtual DOM. And then what it does is it does comparison. So say we added this number 7 in the new change. Okay, I'll show you. For example, we click this button here. That 8 is the new one. So the previous one had 7, then the new one had an 8. And what it does is it only changes, it sees where the change is, and it only changes this specific thing in this whole document. It doesn't re-render the whole thing out. It changes just this part here. And because it does like a memory comparison, it doesn't have to draw out all the HTML and do a comparison. It ends up being a lot quicker. So you will see that actually when I'm clicking this, you can see that just this is actually adjusting. You see the little blue flash when I'm doing that. That's because this element here is actually getting updated. And that's an important one. It's a bit more in depth. So something I couldn't really cover in great detail now. But basically, this is an interview question. They're going to say, what is different about the way that React sort of handles its rendering, and it's that it actually uses a virtual DOM where it's sort of comparing stuff in memory, and then it's only changing the elements that need to be changed instead of all of the HTML. Okay, so I'm just going to go and look at some of these questions here. Just give me a moment. Let's just drag it down so we can actually see it. Is it possible to use variables? Is it possible as variables which are export? So you're answering them. Okay, so can you show an example of a page that uses React later? I'll get to that in a second. But I'll be surprised that like if you didn't come across one website today. I mean, we could just go to react.com. And I'm fairly certain that's going to be a React website. And I'll show you actually a little cool tool while we're here. Let's see if I've got it on. I don't have it. Okay, so you should definitely get this. This is such a cool thing. I'm going to get the name wrong. I always call it Waplaza. Okay, so here it is. Yeah, and it's an extension for your browser. Let's see where it is. Actually, I actually got it right. Waplaza and then Chrome extension. I think I've maybe got the name wrong, but let's just see. Yeah, so there we go. And what this is going to do is it's actually going to show you what is running on the website. Just give it a moment for it to get added, and then reload the page, and then we'll go and see it. Okay, so it's going to be an extension. You're going to see it here. I'm going to go and click this. Unfortunately, I can't zoom in my title bar, so I do apologize for that. But I'm just going to pin it down so there I can see it there. So now if I go and click on a React website, I'm just going to reload the page because I added the extension afterwards, and I click this. I can actually go and see the technology they're actually using it. And there we can see they're actually using React and they're using Gatsby. And Gatsby is basically built onto React. So just straight away, this is React. If I click tutorial here, can you see how that it's just like that, bam. It doesn't actually reload the page. It's actually just loading the content inside of this page. Whereas if it was just a normal website, let's actually just go to like React GitHub. Like GitHub is just like, I don't think it's running on any sort of frameworks. If I was to click enterprise, can you see the whole page loads? Okay, so that's a whole page that is reloading then. And let's just go back to the React site. It's just loading the content inside here, and it's much faster. It doesn't have to do all those network requests. It's probably still getting data, but it doesn't have to get as much data and redraw everything. Okay, so just looking at this one. Okay, it's got that. What's in React and Express, back and front end? Express is for Node and creating backends. It's not the same as React. That'll have to be a discussion for, okay, so I see Tor's actually got that. Yeah, so React is actually a library. It's not even a framework. And the reason why it is actually a library, not a framework, is because it leaves it open for you to handle different things. Like how you want to handle your routing, and routing is that this part here, like when I want to go to tutorial page, that's called routing because it's routing to another page. It lets you use your own library for that. If you're using Angular, and Angular is a framework, not a library, it has that built in. You have to use the thing that they give you for routing. And then for authentication, you have to use the thing they give you. And then for the way that you lay out your files, like when I created the files on left here, I could just do whatever I wanted to. I could just go and add a prop and that's it, done. Angular has got a specific way for you to do things. So that's why it's a framework. You're building using that framework. Okay, so he's got that. He's got that. What is npm package and what is node? So you will get this later on. So npm is just node package manager, and like because of JavaScript, everything is we depend on all of these different libraries that get put together. Like I was showing you with all these node modules. So how do we keep track of this? Before there was npm, you'd have to manually go and add this in here and manually add that in. Whereas now npm, if you go look at your package.json file, you can see that when I look at the files, it's actually got version numbers and it's going to track these version numbers like, yes, your patch, then your minor and your major values. When this big number, this last number, sorry, the first number changes, things are going to break big time. This means that it's not backwards compatible when this first number changes as based by semantic versioning, which is SEMVer. So your package manager is going to sort of try and keep all of this in mind and try and figure these things out. So yeah, I think you will. I think it's maybe not in the course yet, but we are working on npm at the very least on building the content out. And a package is just these node modules. Yeah, these are individual packages that do sort of a specific thing, like this camel case one. That probably takes your code and turns it into camel case. So these are individual packages. It's like when I was on GitHub and then I went to like React. Let's actually just do GitHub. Okay, let me do this one. I really love this one. It's not called Toast. It's called Chalk. When I do backend stuff, I love adding the colors to my code, and so I use Chalk. So Chalk is another package, and you know when I was doing console log, it adds these colors to your text. So it's just that simple. It just adds colors to your text. So this is a package. You know, it's like a program I put in my program, and then I can start making use of it. And then Node is basically when you're running your code, when you're running JavaScript, it's usually running in your browser. So it's running in here. And that means that it's got access to this document. This is the document, yeah, or otherwise it's this HTML is the document. And all of this is built onto this document. So this is like the root of your tree, and all of these things branch off it. Now, if I was to go and write, to my daughter's over, she might just come in and pop in and say hello. Trying to think, how do I get the global object again? Console something. This. Sorry, I'm being silly here. Okay, so console log this. Okay, so if I go and run that, if it stops misbehaving, oh, it's died on me. Oh no. Sorry, everyone. Don't know what's going on there. I must have pushed the shortcut. Oh, okay, well, the browser died as well. Okay, so I must have pushed something and then it got all kinds of freaked out. So just let's get back there. Okay, so sorry about that. I crashed it and then obviously like it just died. Okay, so let's get back to the console there. And where were we? It was localhost. Is it 3000 or 8000? Okay, so we're back here. Okay, so if I console log this, okay, it gives me the window object. Okay, so yeah, you can see all of the stuff to do with this browser. So you can see here's the document, and then I can run things inside the document. Yeah, you did that earlier. I can see what the background color is, and see there's all the stuff to do with this document. Now that's when I'm running JavaScript inside the browser. You can also run JavaScript as inside a terminal, and you do that using Node. So let's just split the terminal here. And what I'll do is I'll just create a basic file. So I'll just create something called script.javascript. Okay, and so now what I can do is I can actually just add some code in here quickly. So I'm going to say console log node running code. Let's get rid of this. Node running code. Okay. And I'm going to save it. Now what I can do here, let's clear that. I can say node, and then it's in the source directory, and then script.js. So now you can see here, Node running code. Okay, so Node is the way that we run code outside of a browser. It also becomes node.js, where there's actually a backend server that you run, because then you can actually write your backend and your front end. Like this is our front end over here, and then our backend is where we can have like server. We can do like things with databases and all kind of stuff. Yeah. So okay, so let's go check out some other these questions. Yeah, sorry. So okay, so then I think that's the last of it. Any other questions? Anybody, feel free to speak on your mic if you'd like. Yep. So I know it is a bit intimidating, as you say, but like just bear with it. I was very slow to pick up React because a lot of these concepts were new to me. I didn't know that what was really going on. I didn't understand these concepts. Just stick with it. It is normal to like feel lost, and when you're doing it, it's normal to like hit these points where you just want to throw your computer out the window. But then the next day you do something cool, and then you're like, whoa, I'm actually the best programmer ever in the whole world. And then an hour later, you're still ready to throw your computer out the window because you've got another bug. And then there's this vicious cycle of throwing your computer out, then bringing it back in, throwing it out, and bringing it back in. So you're going to have these times where you get really, really just, yeah. It's going to be like difficult to pick it up. But then once you get it, I promise you, just give it time, you will get there. Not everybody learns at the same speed. And that's largely because people do have exposure to different things in their life. Like someone might have played a lot of video games. And then in some video games, they might have had something to do with this type of stuff. And so therefore their mind started building some kind of, synapses and things to sort of understand a bit of this stuff, like this type of thinking. Whereas somebody might have like lived out in the wilderness most of their life, and they now decided to become a React developer. And some of these things they need to grasp. Like if you can think maybe your grandparents and that, when they've got a phone, there's things that they haven't had an opportunity to learn throughout their life experience. Whereas you've probably exposed to these things growing up. And so you're going to have people with different learning periods, and that's perfectly fine. It's not going to define who you are if you're going to be a good developer. Just because someone learns something faster than you does not make them a better developer. It just means that they were easily, like, earlier introduced to concepts like this. There isn't one plan, but we can do it when it loops back to me, or even next week I can do another one. But you're more than happy to keep going into React lessons like this. There are a couple of other videos of the React. We have done React videos, but more than happy to do more of these in the future, where we start deep diving into certain things like state and user effects and all of that. Okay, I honestly could just keep going for hours, so I think I'm just going to have to cut it here. We've already gone over about 18 minutes here. So thanks a lot for coming through, and I hope that you enjoyed the session. I apologize to those who are new and you kind of like, wow, they're showing us this. It's good to sort of get exposure now, so that when you do get to it, it makes a bit more sense. And I hope that I did cover some things that sort of made you think a bit, or like you weren't just completely put off and you shut down. If that actually did happen, please let me know, because then I didn't do it right. I need to try and include everybody when we're trying to do these sessions. Okay, right, everyone. Thanks a lot, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll see you around. Please don't hesitate to contact us if you need any help with the coursework. And that's it. MJ, you want to say anything, or do I just stop recording here? I think you might be okay. All right, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording here, and I will see you all around. Cool. Cheers.